Hi Year 10, we've reached the end of the Ecology unit now, which you have entirely studied at home. So I thought it would be a good opportunity now, whilst you're getting your head around the unit and as you begin your revision for this unit, for me to offer you a little bit of support on some of the harder parts of the unit. I'm just going to show you a quick image now, which you might recognise if you looked at the additional information on BBC Bitesize when you were studying the carbon cycle. It's only a really tiny portion of the unit content, but it is important that we have a look at it now. So you see an image with a series of arrows which show the flow of something through the environment. You might recognise it from geography or even from primary school, and I just want you to pause for a moment and give yourself a chance to think, what does it show the movement of and what might those arrows indicate? So you could pause the video now. Okay, hopefully you identified it as the water cycle, and that's what the exam board will call it. It does say hydrological up there, means the same thing, but the exam board will just refer to it as the water cycle if you do get a question on it. So there's 8 processes shown on there, but only 7 of them have actually got numbers on. The processes that are shown by those arrows are listed there. Evaporation, condensation, precipitation, which means rainfall, snow, hail, for those of you who don't remember your Key Stage 3 geography. Transpiration, which is a biological term, and those ones should feel more familiar to you. The other 3 at the bottom there, infiltration, groundwater movement and surface runoff, you probably aren't going to come across these in an exam, but I thought best to include them for completion. The way to figure out which ones those are is simply by thinking about what the words mean. So if you pause the video now, and if you decide please what each of those processes is shown by. So if you just write down arrow 1 is evaporation or whatever, and we'll mark it when you've had a chance to do that. Okay, evaporation, sorry I gave the game away, didn't I? Evaporation is shown here by arrow 1, and you should recognise that's a C. It's the water's then rising into the air. That happens by evaporation. Condensation is shown by arrow number 3, which is here. Precipitation is arrow 4. Transpiration is a biological term, so you've come across it in year 9 and earlier in year 10 in your biology studies. Transpiration is the process by which plants lose water vapour from their leaves, so that's shown here by arrow 2, coming off of those trees. Infiltration, infiltrate means to get within something, and that's shown here by arrow 6. Groundwater movement is movement of water in the ground, so that's shown by arrow 8, and surface runoff is water running off the surface, so that's shown by arrow 5. In reality, the ones that I would expect them to quiz you on, should they do that, but they haven't done yet in any exam series, would be the top 4 there: evaporation, condensation, precipitation, transpiration. Probably transpiration most likely, because that links back to our old learning about plants. Okay, if you do want to take a copy of that or draw it down, it's available on BBC Bitesize or similar versions are, or in a revision guide, or you can pause the video. Okay, so that's the end of the unit officially, and on the screen now you'll see a list of what we've studied. You could use those titles as the names of cue cards if you wanted to make a set of cue cards, or for sections on a mind map, or just for your knowledge for when you can tick things off when you know then you've covered the entire of the unit. The more challenging parts, I think, are the carbon cycle, some aspects of explaining how humans impact on the climate. You did really well with explaining how humans impact on biodiversity. Bit harder to get the full marks when you're talking about how we affect the climate, so we're going to look at that. The decay and biogas production, you did brilliantly on year 10. I was very impressed with the work that you produced on that, but the practical about the rate of decay, the RPA there, that's a bit more tricky, so we're going to have a look at that. Food security, the people that submitted work on that showed a really good understanding of it. Food production around farming and fishing was a bit more tricky for people, and it might have been because you'd not fully understood or not fully completed the work from a fortnight ago, a fortnight before, which was about biomass and energy transfer. So I'm going to provide you some information on that, and then we're going to have a look at the tricky parts of biotechnology as well. The rest of it, you'll find information on Bite Size, on Seneca, and you can ask me if you are struggling when you come to revise and you don't know what this practical is about here, then feel free to get in contact with me. But we're going to start by recapping on the carbon cycle. Most of you did submit work on this, and it was very good. It was, but it's a key part of the scheme of learning for the exam board, and it links to a number of other things in the specification. So they do like to quiz us on it. We study this because carbon is a really important substance. The atoms of carbon are found in every single living organism. We're all carbon-based life forms on this planet. So our cells contain carbon. Everything that we eat and ingest and digest to be able to live and grow, they all contain carbon. So protein, fats, and carbohydrates, including starch and sugar, they all contain carbon. So carbon's a really important substance, but all the carbon that has ever existed and will ever exist was created about 3 billion years ago when the solar system was created, and we can't make any more of it, which means carbon has to be recycled, and that doesn't mean that we're sending it off to the recycling plant down the road in Bolton town centre there. It means that it's nature that's recycling that, and there are 6 living processes that contribute to the constant recycling of carbon. And the best way to remember them is, and those of you who've seen my decay video already will remember this, is by remembering Pred FC, the carbon cycle football team. And I know that's really geeky, but it comes up really often as a 6-mark question. And if you remember Pred FC, at least you're going to be able to remember the processes that it involves. And once you've remembered the processes, you've got enough knowledge to be able to describe those processes and start picking up extra marks. So the P stands for photosynthesis, which is a process plants carry out and algae carry out, and it's them taking in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and using it to make glucose. Glucose then is used in a process called respiration. And the missing bit in most people's answer was that when we did carbon cycle, was that respiration is carried out by every single living cell on the planet. So all animal cells do it, all plant cells do it, but also all microbes and other decomposers do respiration. It's a really fundamental process that we've got to get our heads around, and it is simply using a food source, glucose, to release the energy that we need to live. So when you're describing respiration in the carbon cycle, it's all these types of organisms that release energy from respiration, and all these living organisms are therefore recycling carbon by doing respiration. E stands for eating, which is where the carbon is passed from one organism to another in the food chain. So the plant makes glucose from the carbon dioxide it's ingested. What's the right word? Absorbed, my apologies. So the carbon is first of all taken in, made into glucose. The plant will then use it for some respiration itself, but then the plant will be eaten by animals to transfer glucose, proteins, fats, other carbohydrates into animals, and then animals eat other animals, so it passes along food chains. All living things, sadly, eventually die, and waste matter too has to decay, and decay releases carbon and other nutrients back into the soil. But the main role the main explanation of how decay contributes to the carbon cycle is that decay is carried out by microbes, and microbes respire, and when they do so, it releases carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. F stands for the formation of fossil fuels, and that takes millions of years and quite specific conditions, but that turns dead matter into carbon-based fuels. Carbon-based fuels are what then we use for burning, or C, combustion, and combustion releases carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere for plants then to absorb it for photosynthesis. Okay, so really helpful to try and remember PRED-FC. So bearing PRED-FC in mind, when I finish speaking, just pause the video. What I'd like you to do is look at this diagram, which shows part of the carbon cycle, and I want you to identify arrows A, B, C, and D. So start with process A. Which of our PRED-FC processes is represented by arrow A, which is represented by B, C, and then D? Okay, so pause the video and have a go at identifying those for me. Okay, hopefully you recognise that process A is carbon dioxide being taken in to a plant, so that must be photosynthesis. Arrow B shows some carbon going from plants into animals, so that must be eating. Arrow C shows dead matter going into microbes, so that will be decay. And D is an arrow going from all of these living things, from plants to the atmosphere, from animals to the atmosphere, and from microbes to the atmosphere. So it's a process that all of those living organisms do. What must it be? Respiration. Hopefully you managed to get 4 out of 4 there. If you didn't, it might be worth having another look at the carbon cycle using Bite Size or Seneca. In our explanations of the carbon cycle, I'll just flip back. The parts that are missing in people's answers isn't necessarily the naming of the processes. A lot of people were able to say photosynthesis, respiration, and eating as our main ones. It was the level of detail. So you're looking to describe what each process is in a 6 marker. Who's doing it? What's the carbon like at the beginning? Is it carbon or carbon dioxide at the beginning of the specific process you're talking about? What's the carbon like at the end, and where is the carbon? Was it in the air? Is it in an organism? What's it stored as? Okay, so just add in as much detail as you can about those 6 processes. Just move on. Okay, as I said, you were brilliant at identifying and describing how human activities are affecting biodiversity. If you do need a refresher on it, make some time to do that. But what I want to spend our time on now is looking at how human activities affect the climate. So there's 3 specific activities that release specific gases that are affecting the climate and then the environment. So cow and rice farming, that releases a gas called methane. That's contributing to global warming. It's a greenhouse gas. Burning fossil fuels, a lot of you quite rightly identified this already, but burning them releases carbon dioxide, which is another greenhouse gas, contributes to global warming. The bit that's missing, and my apologies that the title's a bit duffier because this one doesn't affect the climate, but it affects the environment. So when we burn fossil fuels, there are sulfur impurities and other impurities in the fuel, which means that nitrogen oxides and sulfur dioxides are made. And both of those gases, when they're dissolved in rainwater, cause the rainwater to become acidic. Acid rain is not linked to global warming, but acid rain causes harm to plants. It kills them, and it can cause harm to aquatic, so water-based life forms as well. So if water that's acidic falls into a lake, then the fish and the frogs and whatnot that live there are going to be harmed. So they're worth taking note of. If you want to pause it, you can. The part where people really came not unstuck necessarily, I don't think it's that you didn't understand it, I think you just didn't add enough detail into the answers. Maybe it's my fault for the way that I phrased the questions, but you were asked to look at something called peat bogs, and you were all able to tell me what a peat bog is and why we want to drain peat bogs, and you were able to tell me that that's bad for biodiversity because it's destroying habitats. The missing bit was about being able to explain why draining peat bogs leads to the release of carbon dioxide, which then contributes to global warming. So this is the sort of question that you might come across. And if you want to pause the screen to scribble the question down, you can. but we're going to have a look at what the answer would be here. Okay, that's a peat bog. If you've ever been up Rivington moors and like over Darwin Way, you might recognise this sort of scene. A peat bog is partially decomposed plant matter, and it's been there, you know, for thousands of years. But peat makes a fantastic fuel. It is absolutely full of hydrocarbons, and that means it gives us a lot of energy when we burn it. So that's why we're draining peat bogs. But how does that then affect the climate? Well, in two ways. Because it is used as a fuel, that combustion releases carbon dioxide, which then contributes to global warming. But I've put that mark in brackets, sorry, that point there in brackets, because that probably wouldn't get you a mark on that exam question that I just showed you. What it wants you to say there is that when you mix peat bog that you've drained the bog and you're mixing the peat with air just by draining it, it means that the peat bog gets exposed to oxygen. The microbes then that are busy decaying the plant matter in the peat, they can then have access to this oxygen and they begin respiring aerobically. Previously, they'd be at the bottom of that peat bog and they wouldn't be respiring aerobically, they'd be doing it anaerobically. But once they get this extra oxygen, because you've drained the bog, it means those microbes can start to respire aerobically. And, oops, sorry, just like us, they release carbon dioxide when they respire aerobically with oxygen. So if you want to pause and jot that down, you can do. And sorry, I've underlined the words there that would get you the marks in that mark scheme. The other big area that the exam board commonly focus on is deforestation. Deforestation harms the environment in two ways. So it's bad for biodiversity because you're cutting down trees, which means that you're reducing the habitats for animals, but it also has a huge effect on our climate. And this sort of question here is how they might assess your understanding of this. Couldn't fit the marks on at the bottom here, but this is a 6-mark question. Let's have a look at it. It says deforestation affects the environment, and then they've included a lovely little image of deforestation just in case you're struggling with your words that day and they don't want anybody to be put off by not recognizing the word deforestation, so they've given you a lovely picture of it. It says deforestation is causing a change in the amounts of different gases in the atmosphere. This change causes global warming and climate change. Here's an image. So just a load of trees cut down, and it says give the reasons why deforestation is taking place. Describe how deforestation is causing the change in the amounts of different gases in the atmosphere. So this is a bit naughty of them, but it's a 2-part question. Firstly, it wants you to give, that just means say. So you don't have to start going into tons of detail, you can just list them. So list even the reasons why deforestation is taking place, so why are we doing it? And then describe, which means you do need to give a little bit of detail, describe how deforestation is causing the change in the amounts of different gases in the atmosphere. And to get a full 6 marks, what you really need to pay attention to is that word different. It's causing a change in the amounts of different gases, which means you need to talk about at least 2 different gases and how the cutting down of trees is causing that change. So if you just scribble down a little table that looks a bit like this for the 2 parts of that question, and we're going to list the reasons for deforestation, and then we're going to describe how it causes different gases to change in the atmosphere. So if you pause the video now and have a bit of a think and jot those down, and we'll mark it in just a moment. Okay, wood is that you cut down from the trees. It can be used for loads and loads of different things, including building work, so building houses and stuff, for paper and obviously for furniture. All of that though would just be 1 mark. You could say wood used for paper would get you 1 mark. Then saying wood is used for construction isn't going to get you a 2nd mark because it's kind of too similar. Wood is used as a fuel, and we use the land that has been cleared for homes and farming. That's the most commonly missed out answer here for the reasons. We don't just cut wood down to use it. As the human population's getting bigger and bigger every single year, we need to start clearing more land to give us space to house ourselves and feed ourselves. how does this action then cause gases in the atmosphere to change? Well, the predominant change is a change to carbon dioxide, and it will increase, any deforestation will increase carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and there's a few reasons for that. The best answer biologically is to say that it means less photosynthesis is taking place. If you cut down trees, photosynthesis can't take place because they're not there. The trees aren't there to absorb the carbon dioxide, so it just builds up in the atmosphere. The other aspects are to do with what we're using the trees for. So if we start burning trees, then the combustion releases carbon dioxide. Oh, sorry, spurious arrow, I need that in a minute. But also, if we just leave those trees to rot, and that does happen, then the decaying of those trees is going to release carbon and into the soil and carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And if you look here, we said that the land is used for farming. This is what my arrow was for. Land is used for farming, that causes an increase in methane. So if you're farming rice or if you're farming cattle, both of those things are going to release methane. So that's a 6-mark answer there, and you can literally draw it in a table like that if you wanted to, and you could get the full 6 marks. You don't have to start writing it in full sentences. Okay, so if you want to pause so you can mark that and add to your answer, that'd be good. And I'll move on. Okay, we then looked at decay and the production of biogas. You did brilliantly on that, but I would revise it as part of your revision for this unit. After that, we looked at a required practical activity about how temperature affects the rate of milk decay. It's a bit of a tenuous link, to be honest, from the exam board, and it's quite an in-depth practical. When we get to do it in school, you'll feel much more confident doing it, actually, because you've had all this time to think about it than our normal year groups going through the years that have done. But the whole purpose of the practical is to investigate how the temperature of milk affects how long it takes for the pH of that milk to change, and we use that change in pH to measure the rate of decay. So using that scenario there in black, pause the video and identify the variables. So the independent variables, the one we change, dependent we measure, and then the CVs there, the control variables, they're the ones that we keep the same for validity, and you should aim to identify at least 2 of those. So pause the video and have a go. Independent variable is the temperature of the milk. Dependent variable is the time that it takes for the pH of the milk to change. And there's tons of control variables. To me, the most obvious ones are the volume of milk, the type of milk you use, so whether it's semi-skimmed or full fat, for instance, the volume of the indicator that you use, maybe that's a minor one, and certainly the age of the milk. Okay. So here's a slide that shows you how that practical would be carried out in school. Okay, you can pause the video and wrap your head around the information in the steps there. This thing here, number 2, I've said down here, step 2, that's the indicator that we use to show the change in pH. And if you want to pause the video here, you can read the reasons for the other steps that are carried out. I won't bore you by reading it all to you, but if you want to pause, you can. Okay, the bit that people struggled with, and it wasn't everybody, but the people that did answer this have got a better understanding of the practical, and have got a better understanding of the science behind this practical. So it is worth us reflecting on this and just giving ourselves time to think about it. The big question here from me is, why does pH change indicate that milk has decayed? So milk and lipase is the practical that we do in school. We have a bottle of milk, an amount of milk, and we add lipase to it to simulate decay. It's kind of been sped up by the lipase, and what that lipase is doing is it's breaking down lipid. Lipid is a scientific word for fat, and there's quite a lot of fat in the blue top milk, and that lipase that we add is going to break that lipid down. You might remember from Unit 2 Biology, when we looked at digestion, that the product of lipid digestion, there's 2 products. One is fatty acid and one is glycerol. Now, in this scenario, I'm not too bothered about the glycerol because it doesn't have an effect on our practical, but the fatty acid does. Fatty acid is an acid, and any acid will have a pH below 7. So as soon as that fatty acid starts getting released from this enzyme reaction, the pH is going to fall. And how quickly that fatty acid is produced means that, excuse me, excuse me, how quickly that happens tells us how quickly the decay is occurring. That's the practical that we would do in school. Unhelpfully, the BBC have provided a much more simplistic method. I don't think the exam board will refer to the BBC's method, but it does give us a different way of looking at things, just in case the exam board do refer to this. So in the BBC one that you've probably read, the milk just gets left for a very long period of time and it starts to decay naturally, just like yours would over time if you left it out on the unit. Excuse me a sec. In milk, there's tons of sugar, and the sugar that's in milk isn't glucose, it's lactose. Lactose is broken down by an enzyme, and that process makes lactic acid. Lactic acid is another acid, which means the pH is going to fall when it's made. Okay, so you don't actually need to know this, but you might just want to think what the name of that enzyme might be that's breaking down lactose. If you remember, all enzymes end in ASE or A's, so you've learned about carbohydrates, amylase, protease, and lipase. The enzyme that breaks down lactose is called lactase. As I said, the one on the left there is the one that we would be doing in school. But what I will mention is that lactase that's breaking down the lactose, that's made by bacteria. So when when bacteria are decaying stuff, they do so by squirting out enzymes onto whatever it is that they're trying to decay. One of those enzymes will be lactase. They do also make a lipase that breaks down the fat. But that's this is modeling the natural process of decay that involves bacteria. We don't add bacteria to the milk when we do it. We use lipase to simulate the decay there. Okay, any questions on that though, do get in touch. There are some very good videos of it being carried out online too. Okay, the next part of the unit that we looked at was this idea of biomass. So biomass is the mass of dry living matter, whether that's in an organism or in an entire food chain. So we've got a food chain here. Grass is eaten by rabbit, is eaten by fox, is eaten by some kind of big bird, and we can represent that in a pyramid of biomass. So that box at the bottom of the pyramid there shows how much biomass in that food chain belongs to the producer, the grass. This box represents the amount of biomass in all the rabbits. This box is the fox's biomass, and then the bird's biomass at the top there. And there's some key terms there that you might just want to reflect on, check you understand. We can also refer to those as different trophic levels. So a producer is always at the bottom of the food chain, that's the green plant or algae, and that's trophic level 1. The second level is the primary consumer, the herbivore. So there's lots of keywords that you do understand. You might just want to refresh your memory on, but lots of keywords shown on this picture. You did really well on this topic and were able to identify, and draw pyramids of biomass and interpret them, and you're able to do efficiency calculations as well, which is great. The bit that was missing for some people was being able to explain, if you look at that pyramid of biomass, it's decreasing at every level. So there's more biomass at the bottom of the food chain than there is at the top, and about being able to explain why that is. So if we just take this one particular part of the food chain, the biomass, so the living matter, the dry matter from a rabbit, and then going into the fox when the fox eats it, there's less in the fox than there is in the rabbit. And thinking about why that is, and there are four reasons that you need to be aware of. I won't bore you by reading it, but if you want to pause the video and read it for yourself, that'd be useful. And just make sure that you're aware of those things and have some notes about it. The reason we need to know that is because it's good biological knowledge, but also to be able to explain some modern agricultural techniques. So agricultural just meaning farming. So there's two parts of the specification that you need to be aware of, and one is about intensive farming, the other is about sustainable fishing. And again, I won't read it all to you, but it is important that you know why intensive farming is efficient and leads to a higher yield. It's really nasty for the animals, you know, keeping them in small pens and things and keeping them inside and not letting them, you know, graze on grass outside. But you do need to know why it's sensible from a biological perspective and from an energy perspective to do that. So pause the video and have a read of that information, and then improve your work from the week where we did that. Last part that I want to look at is biotechnology. There's two parts to this. One is genetic engineering, and the other is this mycoprotein. Both these biological techniques, these biotechnologies, they're used just like these modern agricultural techniques. They're used to improve food security. So there isn't enough food in some parts of the world, and you've looked at the reasons for that. These technologies and new ways of doing things are to try and level the playing field and get more food in the places where it is needed. Mycoprotein is one of the things they want you to know about. So protein, you'll recognise, that's a part of a healthy diet, and we need protein for growth and repair. It's got the little stem there, myco, tagged onto the front of it. A mycologist is somebody who studies mushrooms and fungus. So a mycoprotein is a protein that has been made from a fungus. And when we make or buy Quorn burgers and things like that, any Quorn products, you look at the ingredients, it'll say on the back mycoprotein, or it might say fusarium, which is the name of the fungus that it comes from. And we can cultivate and harvest this ourselves in big vats like this. So you'll see some arrows of things going into this big vat and arrows of stuff coming out. So waste gases come out and we get the mycoprotein at the bottom, we harvest it. It's got a cooling system. That's important because you don't want it to be above about 40 degrees, because the enzymes in the fusarium will start to denature, and then it won't be able to grow. But you'll see some stuff being added as well. The easiest one to explain, where's my arrow? There it is. The easiest one to explain is the glucose. Glucose is pumped in so that the mycoprotein can actually be made. If the fungus hasn't got any glucose, it can't respire. If it can't respire, it's got no energy. If it's got no energy, it can't grow. It's important to recognise that it's a living thing for that reason. This is a big part of kind of the application of your understanding of respiration. But you need to remember to specify in your answers that it's aerobic respiration that's happening. And if you look here, two gases are being added, ammonia and air. Air contains oxygen, and that's going to allow for aerobic respiration. Aerobic's much more efficient, so it could respire anaerobically, but you're not going to get as much energy, which means you're not going to get as much growth. The second thing that they want you to recognise is that this bubbling allows it to be stirred. Some of these machines actually have like a little propeller in it to keep this liquid being stirred. That just ensures that all the fusarium fungus actually receives the nutrients, it receives the glucose, it receives the air. That means it can grow faster, we get a better yield. The most tricky part that I've not seen come up, but that doesn't mean they can't ask us, is the explanation of why ammonia is added. Sometimes it will say just nitrogen. Here it says ammonia, and in this question, I've not given you the question, but in this question they expected the most able people to remember that ammonia contains nitrogen, and then to link back to something you learnt about when we studied plant growth. The nitrogen is needed to make amino acids. Amino acids are then used to make protein, and that's what we actually want to produce. That's what we want the fusarium to grow. So that's why we've got ammonia. It provides the nitrates that are needed for the production of amino acid. Okay, so that's what I consider to be the hardest parts of that unit. There's another tricky section on genetic engineering, but we're going to study that in a lot of detail when we study genetics, when we're kind of back to normal in school. But I've just put this up here to remind you how we should be aiming to revise. A lot of people just go straight from this first activity to the orange one at the end. You go away and you read your revision guide, or you read bite size, you might watch a video, and then you try some questions. That might just make people feel like they don't understand, though, because unless you actually do something with what you're reading and revising, then you're not actually going to remember it. So what I'm going to encourage you to do is to revisit the material, but then to cover it up and convert what you've read into some kind of notes form. So whether it's a cue card or a mind map or some kind of knowledge organizer, you do need to do that first kind of conversion. You then want to check that it's complete, check that it's correct, check you've not made any errors, and check that you've included the main key points. Following that, you want to try some quick fire questions. So these are just short, snappy, 1-mark questions that either mum and dad can help with, or that Seneca is really useful for. Following that, you do some exam style questions, but you only kind of move on from one stage to another when you're confident. So you wouldn't move on to exam style questions until you can actually remember what it is that you've been trying to revise. Okay, hopefully that model will prove useful. Next week's task is going to be all about providing making it for yourself, but providing me with some notes from this unit. And please don't just copy BBC Bite Size into a new Word document. I really want you to think about what you're reading and to do that conversion, that shortening, that summarising yourself. So get your exercise book or your notes that you've made during home learning out. If you have got a revision guide, open it. But I'm also going to share a couple of videos with you of people on YouTube that summarise the whole of this topic for you. And next week, I'm going to want to see some notes, and I'm going to set you some quick fire questions as well. The following week, we'll look at some exam style questions, and we'll do that in a similar way to this. I'll put some out on some slides and allow you to pause the video and have a go at them. Okay, thank you for listening. Hope it was useful.